The show finally ended an hour later than scheduled. The band played the outro music, but it felt almost intrusive, like putting a soundtrack on something that didn't need one. The audience filed out slowly, reluctantly, like people leaving a concert they wished could go on forever. In the hallways, strangers were hugging. People were exchanging phone numbers, promising to stay in touch, bonded by this unexpected moment of collective humanity. The crew started breaking down the set, but they were moving slower than usual, still processing what they'd witnessed. The camera operators were reviewing footage, shaking their heads in disbelief. The stage manager was on her phone, already fielding calls from the network executives who'd been watching the live feed and couldn't believe what they'd just seen. Backstage, the host sat in his dressing room with the door open. Usually after a show, he'd be pumped up, reviewing clips, checking social media to see what was trending. Tonight, he just sat there quietly, still wearing his suit, his tie loosened, staring at nothing in particular. One of his producers knocked gently on the doorframe. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up at her and gave a small, honest smile. "Yeah, actually, I think I'm better than okay. I think something just changed." "The network's freaking out," she said, but she was smiling too. They don't know if they should be angry or thrilled. The live stream numbers were through the roof. Everyone who tuned in stayed for the whole thing. "I don't care about the numbers," the host said, and he sounded surprised by his own words. "I mean, I do, but not right now. Right now, I'm just thinking about what he said, about how we treat people." Down the hall, Keanu was getting ready to leave. He'd changed into more casual clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt, preparing to head home the same way he'd arrived. The security guard from earlier found him and stopped him before he got to the exit. "Mr. Reeves," the guard said, "I just wanted to say thank you for what you said up there. My daughter, the one applying to colleges, she's been having a hard time, getting rejected from schools, feeling like she's not good enough. And what you said about being kind to yourself, about loss not defining you, I'm going to tell her about it. I think it'll help." Keanu put his hand on the man's shoulder. "She's lucky to have you looking out for her. And tell her from me, rejection isn't a reflection of her worth. It's just information. Some doors close so better ones can open." The guard's eyes got a little watery. "I'll tell her. Thank you. Really." By the time Keanu made it to the subway, the first clips were already online. Someone in the audience had recorded parts of the conversation on their phone, and within minutes it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. The algorithm gods had spoken, and they wanted everyone to see this. The comments sections were unlike anything anyone had seen before. Usually, celebrity interview clips got the standard mix of reactions. Fans defending their favorite stars, critics looking for things to complain about, joke comments trying to get likes. But this was different. People were sharing personal stories. Someone wrote about losing their spouse and how Keanu's words about being alone but not lonely had made them cry with recognition. Another person talked about working in customer service and how they'd been treated like they were invisible, and how Keanu's point about acknowledging people had validated years of hurt. A teacher posted about how she was going to show the clip to her students as an example of responding to cruelty with grace. A therapist said she'd been trying to explain certain concepts to her clients for years, and Keanu had just done it perfectly in 5 minutes. The host's name was trending too, but surprisingly most of the comments weren't dragging him. People were acknowledging his apology, his willingness to be vulnerable on camera, his growth in real time. "This is how you own up to mistakes," one popular tweet said. "No excuses, no deflection, just genuine accountability." By the next morning, every major news outlet was covering it. Entertainment sites, news channels, even serious publications that normally didn't care about late-night television. They were all talking about this moment of unexpected emotional honesty, this break from the usual script, this reminder that beneath all the celebrity and performance, we're all just humans trying to figure things out. The host's phone was blowing up. Interview requests, podcast invitations, everyone wanting him to talk about what had happened. But he turned them all down. Instead, he spent the next few days thinking, really thinking, about the kind of show he wanted to create going forward. When he returned to the air the following week, his monologue was different. Still funny, still sharp, but without the edge of meanness that had defined his comedy before. He talked about the experience with Keanu, not to capitalize on it, but to explain what he'd learned from it. "I've been thinking a lot about the difference between punching up and punching down," he told his audience. "About the difference between satire that challenges power and mockery that just makes people feel small. And I realized I'd been getting it wrong. Comedy should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, not the other way around." He implemented new guidelines for his writer's room. They could still be funny, still be edgy, but the target of the humor had to matter. Make fun of the powerful people who abuse their positions. Satirize ridiculous policies and absurd situations. But don't mock someone's appearance, their personal struggles, their grief, their kindness. Some fans complained that the show had gone soft, but more people tuned in than ever before. Because what the host discovered was that audiences were tired of cruelty disguised as comedy. They wanted to laugh, yes, but they also wanted to feel good about what they were laughing at. Over the following months, the host's interviews became known for something different. He still had celebrities on, still promoted their movies and shows, but the conversations went deeper. He asked questions that actually mattered. He listened to the answers. He created space for real human connection instead of just mining for viral moments. Keanu, for his part, continued being exactly who he'd always been. He didn't give a bunch of interviews about the incident. He didn't write a book about it or try to turn it into a movement. He just kept doing his work, kept being kind to people, kept taking the subway and sitting on benches and living his life with quiet integrity. But something had shifted in the culture. The clip from that night kept circulating, kept finding new audiences. Parents showed it to their kids. Teachers used it in classes about empathy and communication. It became one of those reference points that people brought up in conversations about how to treat each other, about what really matters in life. A few months later, the host and Keanu ran into each other at an industry event. They spotted each other across the room, and without any discussion, both of them smiled and moved through the crowd toward each other. "How are you doing?" Keanu asked when they met. "Better," the host said honestly. "A lot better, actually. Thank you for that night, I mean it. You changed something for me." Keanu shook his head gently. "You did that yourself. I just said some things that you were already ready to hear. The hard part was what you did after. Changing how you work. Staying committed to doing better. That was all you." They talked for a while, not about work or projects or anything industry-related, just about life. The host mentioned he'd started volunteering at a local community center, teaching kids about media literacy. Keanu talked about a quiet weekend he'd spent hiking, just being in nature and thinking. Before they parted, the host said something he'd been wanting to say for months. "You know that thing you said? About how we treat people who can't do anything for us. I think about that every single day now. It's like a compass. When I'm not sure how to handle something, I ask myself that question." Keanu smiled. "That's wonderful. But remember, it's not about being perfect. We all mess up. We all have moments where we're less than we want to be. The point is to notice it, to try to do better, to keep showing up with the intention to be kind." After they said their goodbyes, the host stood there for a moment watching Keanu disappear into the crowd, stopping to talk to a server carrying a tray of drinks, asking someone about their day, being fully present with each person he encountered. Years later, when people asked the host about the turning point in his career, about when his show evolved from sharp-edged comedy to something more meaningful, he always pointed to that night. Not because Keanu had called him out or made him look bad, but because Keanu had shown him, with patience and grace, that there was a better way to be. The clip is still out there, still being shared, still finding people who need to hear those words, about kindness being a choice, about treating people with dignity regardless of what they can do for you, about being alone not being the same as being lonely, about using whatever platform you have to lift people up rather than tear them down. And sometimes, late at night, people watching that clip notice something beautiful. You can see the exact moment when the host's face changes, when he goes from performing to being real, when he stops defending and starts listening, when he lets himself be changed by someone else's truth. That's the moment that matters. Not the viral views or the trending topics or the think pieces, but that moment of transformation, that willingness to be vulnerable enough to admit you were wrong and strong enough to choose to be different. Because in the end, that's what Keanu had been talking about all along. We're all just walking each other home, all trying to figure out how to be better humans, all deserving of grace when we stumble and celebration when we grow. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to witness that growth happening right in front of us, reminding us that change is always possible, that it's never too late to choose kindness, that the way we treat each other really does matter. The show that night wasn't supposed to be important. It was supposed to be another episode in an endless stream of episodes forgotten by next week, replaced by whatever came next. Instead, it became a moment that people remembered, that they referenced, that they used as a touchstone for how to be better to each other. And all because one person chose to respond to cruelty with patience, to mockery with truth, to cynicism with hope. All because Keanu Reeves, sitting in that chair under those bright lights, decided that the most radical thing he could do was simply be honest about what it means to be human. The words hung in the air like smoke after a firework, visible and tangible and impossible to ignore. The host sat behind his desk, and for maybe the first time in his entire career, he had absolutely no idea what to say next. All his training, all his experience, all those years of quick comebacks and perfectly timed jokes, it all just evaporated. He looked down at the cards on his desk. The jokes his writers had crafted, the clever observations about Keanu's career, the playful jabs that were supposed to make for good television, they all seemed like garbage now, like relics from a different era, a different universe where none of this conversation had happened. The audience was dead silent, not the kind of silence that happens when people are waiting for the next joke. This was the kind of silence that happens in churches, in hospitals, in moments when something profound has just occurred, and nobody wants to be the first one to break the spell. One of the cameras was still rolling, capturing every second of this. The director in the control booth was probably losing his mind, trying to figure out if this was a disaster or the best television they'd ever made. Maybe it was both. The host finally looked up from his cards and met Keanu's eyes. Really met them, maybe for the first time since the interview had started. And what he saw there wasn't anger or smugness or the satisfaction of having just won an argument. It was just openness, honesty, a kind of gentle patience that said, "I'm not your enemy. We're just two people having a conversation." The host started, then stopped. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, more real. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I don't know what to say." Keanu's expression softened even more. "You don't have to say anything." But the host shook his head. "No, I do. I really do." He pushed the cards away from him, actually physically moved them to the far corner of his desk like he was clearing space for something new. "I've been doing this show for years, making jokes about celebrities, poking fun at people. And I always told myself it was harmless, you know? It's just comedy. It's just entertainment. Everyone's in on the joke." He paused, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words, and they kept slipping away from him. "But I wasn't joking just then, was I?" he continued, and there was something raw in his voice now. "I was being mean. I was making fun of your personal life, your losses, things that actually hurt you. And I did it in front of all these people on camera for what? For laughs? For ratings?" The audience was watching this unfold like they were witnessing something they'd tell their friends about for years. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't part of the show. This was real human emotion happening in real time, and everyone could feel it. "You know what the worst part is?" the host said. And now he was talking more to himself than to anyone else. "I knew it was crossing a line. Even as I was saying those things, I knew. I could feel it. But I kept going anyway because that's what I do. That's my thing. The guy who's not afraid to say what everyone's thinking, right?" He laughed, but it was a bitter sound, completely empty of humor. Except everyone wasn't thinking that. "I was just being cruel and calling it comedy. And you," he gestured at Keanu. "You just sat there and took it. You could have gotten angry. You could have walked off. You could have destroyed me with one sentence and people would have cheered for you. But instead you responded with more grace and wisdom than I've probably shown in my entire career." A woman in the audience started clapping. Just one person at first, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire studio was applauding, and it wasn't the excited, pumped-up applause from the beginning of the show. This was different. This was appreciation, recognition, maybe even a kind of collective catharsis. The host held up his hand, and the applause gradually died down. He stood up from behind his desk, which he almost never did during interviews. He walked around to where Keanu was sitting, and for a moment he just stood there, looking down at this man who had just taught him something fundamental about being human. "I'm sorry," the host said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I'm genuinely, truly sorry. Not just for the show, but for every time I've done this. For every person I've mocked or belittled or made to feel small for the sake of a laugh. You didn't deserve that. Nobody does. Keanu stood up too, and for a second the host looked worried, like maybe Keanu was going to leave after all. But instead, Keanu extended his hand. Just a simple gesture, offering a handshake like this was a meeting of equals, like the last 20 minutes hadn't just happened. The host looked at that hand, and something in his face just crumpled. He took Keanu's hand and then, breaking every rule of late-night television, he pulled Keanu into a hug. A real one, not the quick pat on the back kind that celebrities do on camera, an actual embrace between two people who had just shared something meaningful. When they separated, the host's eyes were wet. So were Keanu's, just a little. The audience was a mess. People were crying openly, hugging strangers sitting next to them, experiencing this collective moment of emotional vulnerability that nobody had expected when they'd shown up for a comedy show. The host wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring that millions of people would see this, that clips would be everywhere by morning. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Can we just talk? Really talk? Without the jokes and the bits and all the stuff I thought I needed to do to make this entertaining?" Keanu smiled. That full, genuine smile that rarely showed up in his movies but that people who actually knew him saw all the time. "I'd like that." They sat back down, but it felt like a completely different show now. The host leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, like he was talking to a friend rather than interviewing a celebrity. "Tell me about your new movie," he said. "Not the prepared talking points or the stuff the studio wants you to promote. Tell me what it means to you, why you chose to do it," and Keanu did. He talked about the character, about the themes that had resonated with him, about the crew he'd worked with and the small moments on set that had made him laugh. The host listened, actually listened, asking real questions that came from genuine curiosity rather than from a card his writers had prepared. They talked about life, about loss, about finding meaning in work and connection with others. The host shared some of his own struggles, things he'd never mentioned on camera before. His own losses, his own moments of feeling alone, his own questions about whether he was living the life he wanted to live or just the life he'd stumbled into. The conversation went on past the scheduled time. The director in the booth kept signaling to wrap it up, but the host ignored him. The band sat quietly, instruments ready, waiting for a cue that never came. The audience didn't move, didn't check their phones, didn't whisper to each other. They just watched and listened, part of something they knew was special. At one point, Keanu said something that would be quoted in think pieces and social media posts for weeks afterward. The host had asked him how he stayed so grounded, so connected to who he was despite all the fame and money and attention. "I think it helps to remember that we're all just walking each other home," Keanu said thoughtfully. "We're all on this journey together and none of us really knows where we're going or how long we've got. So the least we can do is be kind to our fellow travelers, help them when they stumble, celebrate with them when things go right, sit with them when things go wrong. That's it. That's the whole thing." The host sat back in his chair, just absorbing that. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. "And it makes everything I usually do seem pretty small." "I don't think it's small," Keanu countered. "You make people laugh. That's not nothing. Laughter matters. Joy matters. You've probably gotten people through some hard days just by making them forget their troubles for half an hour. That's valuable. But there's a difference between making people laugh and making them laugh at someone else's pain," the host said. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, there is. But now you see that difference. And that's what matters." Keanu kept his eyes on the host, and there was something in his gaze that made the whole studio hold its breath. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was something deeper, something more grounded. It was the look of someone who had seen enough of life to know when to speak and what to say. "You mentioned the subway," Keanu continued, his voice still soft but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in to hear. "I take the subway because I like it. There's something honest about it. Everyone's just trying to get somewhere. Nobody's pretending to be anything other than what they are. A teacher heading home after a long day, a student going to class, someone visiting their family. We're all just people moving through the city together." The host opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but Keanu kept talking. "And yeah, it's faster than sitting in traffic. But it's more than that. When you're on the subway, you're part of the world in a real way. You're not separated from it by tinted windows and a driver. You see people. You hear them. Sometimes you talk to them. That's not a PR strategy. That's just being alive and being part of things. A few people in the audience nodded. The woman who had gasped earlier had tears in her eyes. The host shifted in his chair, suddenly looking less comfortable than he had all evening. As for wearing black, Keanu said, and the tiniest hint of a smile touched his lips. You're right. I do wear a lot of black. It's simple. I don't have to think about it. I can focus on other things like the work I'm doing or the people I'm talking to. Fashion's never really been my thing. Some people express themselves through clothes. That's great. I express myself through other ways. He paused, letting that sink in. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Now, about my career, Keanu went on, and his tone remained even, patient, like he was explaining something to a friend, rather than defending himself on national television. You said I play the same character over and over, and I can see why it might look that way from the outside. But here's the thing. I choose roles that mean something to me. Not because they're flashy or because they'll win awards, but because they speak to something I understand. He leaned back slightly, gathering his thoughts. The host was just sitting there now, all his prepared jokes forgotten, his cards lying useless on the desk. When I read a script about someone who's quiet and observant, someone who's been through pain but keeps going, someone who protects the people they love, yeah, I connect with that. That resonates with me, so I say yes to those roles. Not because I can't play other things, but because those are the stories I want to tell. Is that limiting? Maybe, but it's honest. And I'd rather be honest than try to be something I'm not just to prove range to critics. A few people in the audience started clapping, just a few at first. But the host held up his hand slightly and they stopped. He wanted to hear the rest of this. You talked about me being alone, Keanu said, and now his voice got even softer, more personal, sitting on benches. Eating by myself. And you said it was sad. The host's face was starting to show something that might have been regret, but Keanu didn't sound accusatory. He sounded like he was genuinely trying to help the host understand. I've lost people I loved, Keanu said simply. People who mattered more to me than anything in this world. My best friend, my daughter, my girlfriend, people who I thought I'd spend my whole life with. And when you go through that, when you lose people like that, you learn some things. The woman in the front row was openly crying now. So were several other people. Even some of the crew members had stopped what they were doing to listen. You learn that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Keanu continued. Sometimes sitting on a bench by yourself, watching the world go by, that's not sad. That's peaceful. It's a moment to breathe, to think, to remember, to just be present with your own thoughts without needing noise or distraction or other people to validate that you exist. He looked around the studio, at the audience, at the cameras, at the crew members standing in the shadows, and yeah, I spent my birthday alone this year. But I wasn't sitting there feeling sorry for myself. I was thinking about all the birthdays I'd had, all the people who'd been part of my life. I was grateful for the time I got with them, even though it ended too soon. I was remembering good moments. I was being thankful for another year of life, another year of getting to do work I love, another year of meeting people and trying to make things a little better where I can. The silence in the studio was profound now. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the kind of silence where everyone's listening so hard they forget to breathe. You asked if my kindness is real, or if it's just publicity, Keanu said, and now he looked directly at the host, not confrontational but searching, like he was trying to see something deeper. And I get why you'd ask that. We live in a world where everything's calculated, where people do things for likes and follows and trending hashtags, where kindness is turned into content and sincerity is measured in engagement rates. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. But here's what I believe. The world's already got enough meanness in it, enough people tearing each other down, enough cruelty disguised as honesty, enough mockery disguised as humor. So when I meet someone, anyone, whether it's a camera operator or a security guard or a fan on the street, I try to actually see them, not as someone who can do something for me, but as a person who's living their own complex life, dealing with their own struggles, carrying their own grief and joy. He spread his hands. A simple gesture. If I remember someone's name or ask about their kid or compliment something about them, it's not because I'm building a brand. It's because that's a human being in front of me, and they deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to be treated with respect. Not because of what they do or who they know, but because they exist. Because we're all in this together. The host had gone completely still. He wasn't performing anymore, wasn't thinking about the cameras or the audience or the material his writers had prepared. He was just listening, really listening, maybe for the first time all night. You said something earlier, Keanu continued, about people being too nice, like it can't be real. And I understand that cynicism. I really do. But the thing is, being kind isn't about being weak or naive. It's a choice you make every single day. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes people take advantage of it. Sometimes people mock you for it, call it fake. Say you're just doing it for attention. He paused, and that slight smile returned to his face. But I've found that how you treat people says more about you than it does about them. When you're kind to someone who can't do anything for you, when you're respectful to someone who has no power over your life, when you acknowledge people who are usually invisible, that's when you find out who you really are. The camera operator who had lowered his camera earlier now had it back up, but his eyes were red. The stage manager in the wings was wiping at her face with her sleeve. All around the studio, people were feeling something they hadn't expected to feel during a late-night comedy show. So to answer your question, Keanu said gently, yes, it's real. The kindness is real. The quiet moments are real. The gratitude is real, all of it. Not because I'm better than anyone else, not because I've figured everything out, but because I've been through enough to know that we don't get unlimited time here. We don't get to take back the cruel words or the dismissive gestures or the moments when we made someone feel small. He looked around the room one more time, his gaze touching on faces in the audience, crew members, the band, and finally settling back on the host. I hope I've never made anyone feel that way, Keanu said quietly. I hope when people meet me, they walk away feeling a little better than they did before, not worse. I hope I've used whatever platform I have to lift people up rather than tear them down. And I hope you feel the same way about the work you do. The host was on a roll now, and he could feel the audience's attention locked in on every word. This was the sweet spot of late-night television, that moment where a conversation could go from friendly chat to something more memorable, more shareable, more likely to trend online by morning. No, but seriously, the host continued, gesturing with his hands. You've got this whole thing going on where you're the nicest guy in Hollywood. Everyone's got a story about how you helped them or gave away money or stopped to take a picture. It's like you're collecting good deeds like Pokemon cards. The audience laughed, but it was that kind of laughter that had a question mark attached to it. People weren't quite sure where this was going, but they were watching closely now. Keanu sat there, one leg crossed over the other, his hands resting comfortably on the armrests of the chair. He tilted his head slightly, listening. And your fashion sense, the host went on, looking Keanu up and down. Man, I gotta ask, do you own anything that isn't black? Like, does your closet look like you're preparing for a funeral every single day? More laughter, louder this time. The host was feeding off it, gaining confidence. His writers had given him gold, and he was going to mine every bit of it. Keanu glanced down at his black suit and actually smiled a little. I like black, he said simply. It's easy. Easy. The host repeated, slapping his desk. See, that's what I mean. You've got millions of dollars. You could have a personal stylist. You could wear custom Italian suits in every color of the rainbow. But no, you're like, I'll take the black one, again, for the 1,000th time. The band played a little sting, and the audience ate it up. But there were some people in the crowd who were starting to feel uncomfortable. You could see it in their faces, the way some smiles were becoming a bit fixed, a bit uncertain. There's a line between playful roasting and something else, and the host was dancing right on that edge. I actually wanted to talk about your career, the host said, shuffling some cards on his desk, because you've had this interesting trajectory. You were huge in the 90s with Speed and The Matrix. Then you kind of disappeared for a while. Then you came back with John Wick, playing basically the same character you always play. Keanu nodded, still calm. I wouldn't say it's the same character. Oh, come on, the host interrupted, leaning forward. Serious guy in black. Doesn't talk much. Knows martial arts. Gets revenge on people who wronged him. I mean, I'm basically describing 3 different movies right there, aren't I? A few people in the audience laughed, but others were silent. One woman in the 3rd row had her arms crossed. A guy near the aisle was frowning. The camera operators kept filming, but even they were starting to exchange glances. This was getting uncomfortable. Keanu took a breath like he was considering how to respond, but before he could say anything, the host kept going. And let's talk about your personal life for a second, the host said. And that's when the room really started to shift. You could almost feel the temperature drop a few degrees. I saw this photo online a few weeks ago. You were sitting on a bench by yourself, eating what looked like a sandwich or something, and people were like, "Oh, look how humble he is." But I looked at that picture and thought, man, that's kind of sad, isn't it? The laughter was definitely nervous now. Some people weren't laughing at all. The host didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and just didn't care. He was committed to the bit. Like you're a huge movie star, he continued. You could be at any fancy restaurant in the world. You could have people lined up to hang out with you. But there you are, alone on a bench, eating a sandwich like you've got nobody. Keanu's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying close attention. He uncrossed his legs and sat up a little straighter. The host pulled out another card. "Oh, and speaking of being alone, wasn't your birthday recently? Someone told me you spent it by yourself. Is that true?" "I did, yeah," Keanu said quietly. "See?" the host said, pointing at him like he'd just won an argument. "That's what I'm saying. Who spends their birthday alone? You're Keanu Reeves. You could throw a party that would make the Oscars look like a kid's sleepover, but instead you're sitting somewhere by yourself, probably eating another sandwich, probably wearing black." The audience's laughter was scattered now, uncomfortable. It was the kind of laughter people make when they don't know what else to do, when they feel like they should go along with the joke, but something in their gut is telling them this isn't right. One of the cameramen had actually lowered his camera slightly, just for a moment, like he wasn't sure he wanted to keep filming this. The stage manager in the wings was watching with her arms crossed, her mouth set in a tight line, but the host wasn't done. He'd prepared this material and he was going to use all of it. "I think what bothers me," the host said, and his tone was shifting now, becoming more serious, more pointed, "is this whole sad Keanu meme thing. People see you looking lonely and they turn it into this internet joke, and you go along with it because it fits this image of you being the humble, tragic figure. But come on, man, is it real? Or is it just really good publicity?" That was the moment when the room went completely silent. No laughter. No applause. Just dead silence. The kind of silence that's actually loud, that fills up space and makes everyone acutely aware of how uncomfortable they are. Keanu sat there, looking at the host with those dark eyes that had stared down countless cameras over decades of filmmaking. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He just looked present. Fully there, fully aware of what was happening. "Because here's what I think," the host went on, apparently mistaking the silence for rapt attention rather than discomfort. "I think you've figured out the perfect formula. Be nice to everyone. Ride the subway. Eat sandwiches on benches. Give away money. And everyone loves you for it. Everyone thinks you're authentic. But is anyone really that nice? Or is it just the best PR strategy in Hollywood?" A woman in the front row actually gasped. It was quiet, but in that silence, everyone heard it. The host glanced at her, then back at Keanu, and for just a second you could see a flicker of doubt cross his face. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far, but he couldn't stop now. Stopping would be admitting he'd made a mistake, and that wasn't part of the show. So he pushed forward. "And the thing about your movies," he said, picking up another card, "you're always playing these stoic, quiet guys who barely show emotion. And I wonder if that's just you being you, or if it's because, the range isn't really there." The band was silent. The audience was silent. Even the crew had stopped their usual behind-the-scenes movements. Everyone was just watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Keanu slowly uncrossed his arms. He placed both hands on the armrests of his chair and leaned forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear, carrying across the studio in that silence. "Can I say something?" he asked. The host blinked like he hadn't expected to be interrupted. Yeah, of course." "Thank you for having me on your show," Keanu began, and his tone was genuine without a trace of sarcasm. "I know comedy comes from pushing buttons sometimes. I get that. And I know I'm here to promote a movie, and you're here to make entertaining television." The host nodded, looking slightly relieved. Maybe this was going to be okay. Maybe Keanu was going to laugh it off, play along, make a joke of his own. But Keanu wasn't done. The television studio was buzzing with energy that Tuesday evening. Camera operators were doing their final checks. Makeup artists were touching up faces. And the audience was filing into their seats with that excited chatter that always fills a room before a live taping. This wasn't just any talk show. This was one of those late-night programs that people actually talked about the next day at work. The kind where clips would be shared thousands of times before anyone even had their morning coffee. Behind the scenes, things were moving like clockwork. The production crew had done this dance hundreds of times before. They knew exactly when to dim the house lights, exactly when to cue the band, exactly when to tell the host that they were going live in 60 seconds. Everything was planned down to the minute, including tonight's guest list. And the main guest? That was Keanu Reeves. Now, if you know anything about Hollywood, you know Keanu is kind of a big deal. Not in that flashy look-at-me kind of way, but in a way that's actually pretty rare these days. He's the guy who takes pay cuts so the crew can get better wages. He's the one who gives away millions to cancer research without making a big announcement about it. He rides the subway. He sits on benches eating sandwiches. He's basically become the internet's favorite person, and for good reason. But here's the thing about late-night talk shows. They thrive on a certain kind of energy, witty banter, playful teasing, sometimes even a little bit of roasting. The host of this particular show had built his entire career on that formula. He was sharp, quick with a comeback, and he knew how to work a crowd. People tuned in specifically because he wasn't afraid to poke fun at celebrities, to bring them down a notch, to remind everyone that these famous folks are just regular people who happen to be on television. The host sat in his dressing room, going over his notes one more time. His writers had been working on material all week. They'd pulled together jokes about Keanu's movies, his personal life, even some of those viral photos that had been floating around online. The kind of material that would get laughs, that would make for good clips, that would get people talking on social media. That was the game, after all. Get people talking. One of the producers knocked on the door. 5 minutes until we start, she said, poking her head in. Keanu just arrived. He's backstage now. The host nodded, standing up to check his appearance one last time in the mirror. He straightened his tie and ran his hand through his hair. This was going to be good television. He could feel it. Out in the hallway, Keanu was doing something that had become completely natural to him over the years. He was meeting people, not in that fake Hollywood way where you shake someone's hand while already looking past them to the next person, actually meeting them. He stopped to chat with the security guard at the back entrance, asking about his daughter who was applying to colleges. He complimented the wardrobe assistant's tattoo and asked where she'd gotten it done. He remembered the name of a camera operator he'd met 2 years ago on a different show, and asked how his knee surgery had gone.